So for many, many years, jurisdictions have spent millions of dollars to secure the data on physical credentials using overt, covert, and forensic card security features that are designed to prevent tampering and show if a card has been compromised. The physical card has been a great asset for proof of identity and driving status, but there are some limitations, and Jeff alluded to some of those just a few minutes ago. Physical cards are only as accurate as they were the day they were issued and left the office. Changes in identity information, i.e. address or driving restriction changes, are not reflected on the card unless the holder obtains a replacement. For the holder to prove identity, they must hand over the card that has all, and I say again, all of their identifying information, which in many cases is scanned or copied for proof. When jurisdictions began to gather requirements for the mDL, we wanted to ensure that what we settled on was privacy-centric and had built-in data protections and was an improvement over the current physical card. These are designed to be foundational and be foundations of an mDL solution that is provided by our vendor community. This also leaves room, though, for customization by the vendor community or the issuing authorities. So the main tenets that we were looking at were that the mDL had to have the ability to confirm identity and convey driving privilege. This is the backbone of a driving credential. You need to know who the person is that has the credential and whether or not they're allowed to drive the vehicle they're in or at the time they're driving. I know this is an obvious thing, but when you're gathering requirements, you have to state everything so that you don't miss something. Privacy of the mDL holder and security of the data is also extremely important. In fact, as Jeff mentioned before, privacy and security was the base tenet that everything else was generated around. So that means that any requirement that we published must adhere to the privacy of the mDL holder, as well as the security of the data used to provision the mDL. Privacy of the mDL holder includes the inability to track their mDL usage. You should not be able to determine when the mDL was used nor where it was used. And for an example, I'll use myself. You shouldn't be able to tell that Mike McCaskill used his mDL to prove his age at his local liquor store 5 times this week during the COVID-19 issue. That's just something that we can't have. Privacy also includes the holder's ability to only release the data they wish to release, as Jeff mentioned before. Only releasing the information that I am over 21 and authorized to make the age-restricted purchase doesn't give the relying party, the liquor store clerk in this case, any more information than they need to complete the transaction. No personal data was released, minimizing the possibility for identity theft or fraud. Next slide, please. Interoperability was also a very important piece of this. With the physical card, interoperability is not an issue since the acceptance of the driver license or identification card is a visual process. You compare the photo on the license to the person standing in front of you and make your determination as to whether or not that is that person's credential. With an mDL, there must be a way for all relying parties to consume the data electronically. This is accomplished by solutions following the ISO 18013 Part 5 standard. And interoperability is not just in particular jurisdictions, but across all jurisdictions, both in the US and globally. The credential must be trustable. The relying parties must be able to trust the mDL. Trust that the mDL was issued by the issuing authority. Trust that the data is authentic and can validate the data with the issuing authority if needed, if the need arises. And these would be in cases where you have high dollar transactions in a bank or purchases of controlled substances in a pharmacy. The mDL also has to be able to work offline. This is especially important in a law enforcement arena where law enforcement are in remote areas without cellular coverage. There are instances where either the mDL or the reader are not connected to a network and therefore cannot validate data with the issuing authority. In these cases, the ability to validate that data, that the data was issued to the holder by the issuing authority, is still a main requirement. And then we also have to have the ability to manage the mDL remotely. The data must be updated in real time, and any changes to an identity or driving privilege must be updated to the mDL when they are changed in the system of record. Therefore, we have the most up-to-date information sitting on the mDL at all times. Jurisdictions must have the ability to remove an mDL from a device if needed also. In the circumstance where an mDL was obtained under fraudulent circumstances, the jurisdiction needs to be able to remove that mDL upon notification. Next slide, please. In conclusion of all this, the requirements are the required elements for an mDL. If any one of these were left out of an mDL solution, it can't really be considered an mDL.